Hi, I'm going to take on a quick demonstration on how I make my custom logo cufflinks with resin. The first is find out what size backing you're using for cufflinks. In this case, I'm using 18 millimeter, and so I know that, so I've created an 18 millimeter square template here that I use and just drag and drop all my logos right onto and save it as is. In this case, I'll show you how to build one from scratch. This is going to be a simple one, so I'm not really taking the logo, I'm just going to use some typeface. So let's create another layer. So the first layer, just to show you what I have here, the first layer you can see on the right hand side where the layers section is just an outline of the border, and with the hole cut out in the middle. And then I have my white background, so that way I can just drop something in there, and it's perfect 18 millimeter round for the round cufflinks. So I'm going to create another layer and make the background black, and I drag it behind the top layer. There we go. And I'm going to create some text right here. Perfect. More or less. Let's change the size of that. Can play around with this another time, but just to get an idea. Now I want to center it. Looks great. Okay. At this point, I just flatten it, save it as a separate image file, and then I copy and paste it onto an 8.5 by 11 sheet. As you can see over here, I've done so. I have a bunch of different types of cufflinks that I'm going to be making. So I've made several different types here, and I put them on an 8.5 by 11, go over to a copy center, and have it printed out color. And now I'll take you on to the next step of it. Now that you've gotten your logos printed at a copy center on an 8.5 by 11, you can go on to the next step. You want to seal the paper with something I use called Mod Podge, which is it's like a type of glue. Use a couple different coats onto the front and back of your page, and it will seal the paper to make sure that the logos don't warp and bubble during the process with the resin. So Mod Podge, you can get it anywhere, like craft stores, art stores, Mod Podge. You're also going to need a paintbrush. Do a couple given coats. So I'm going to pour some on the side of the paper right there. And use your paintbrush to just give a light coating over all the logos on your page. Now that you've finished the first coat, you're going to wait about 15-20 minutes for that to dry, and then do another coat. I typically like to do 2 coats in the front and at least 1 coat on the back of the paper. Now that you've done 2 coats of Mod Podge on the top side and 2 coats on the bottom side, the next step is to cut out the logos very carefully. So we have their sheet here, Mod Podge both sides, nice sharp pair of scissors, and you're just going to go around the edges very carefully. There they are. These are the 2 logos. On to the next step. So now I've put a little Mod Podge over here. You're going to take your backing, and you're carefully going to just paint the inside nice and evenly. Cool. And take your logo. Make sure it lines up with the way the backing is going to sit. And you're going to want to press that nice and evenly on there. Make sure there's no bubbles. Make sure it's not popping up on the sides and the edges. Okay, and you can always just kind of move it around with your thumb if it's not evenly on there. You want to line it up nicely. Great. Now that that's on there, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's on there, I promise. You're going to take a little more Mod Podge, and you're going to just give it a little dusting on the top. Make sure that you really get it inside the edges, around the edges on the sides, to make sure that it seals it so the resin doesn't seep in there. Now you let this sit for another about 15-20 minutes. During this time, you're going to want to start heating up your resin,
the resin and the hardener that I'll show you in a minute. You're going to put it in some really hot water. So while this dries, you can let that start to heat up in the hot water. Two things that I didn't mention before is while you're adding the logo and the Mod Podge on top of the logo, make sure you get all the air bubbles out with the brush. Just brush them out, otherwise they will harden and you'll see them underneath the resin. It just doesn't look that good. So just make sure that you get all those air bubbles out from in there when you're brushing it. The second thing is, before you pour the resin, make sure that the Mod Podge is completely dry. I found that if it's not 100% dry, after you pour the resin and it hardens, it gets cloudy. So just wait that extra 5-10 minutes, make sure the Mod Podge is dry and that your whole thing is ready for the resin. Next, you want to heat up your resin. This is the resin I buy, Easy Cast. Make sure that you get clear casting epoxy. This is the clear one, so it will not dry opaque. It'll dry nice and clear. Comes in two parts, the hardener and the actual resin. Fill up a measuring cup. Don't use this measuring cup again for food. It's gross. Put hot water in there from the tap and the 2 bottles of resin mixture. Let it sit for about 20 minutes. Our resin is just about done heating in the warm water. Let me show you what I've built. You need to create some sort of jig, which is a place for the cufflinks to be held on. They have to be held secure and level, so that way the resin dries flat and doesn't spill at all. So what I've done here is used corrugated foam or plastic to create this jig. The cufflink slides right in. I'll show you as an example. Put it right inside here, and it holds it up nicely and level during the drying process. It takes about 24 to 36 hours for the resin to dry nicely. So you want to create one of these. I've just taken the resin out of the warm water. You're going to want to shake the bottles a little bit to make sure that the warm resin and hardener mixes nice and evenly. And gets the rest of it warm. After you do that, you're going to want to take a couple shot glasses if you're not doing that much, and a regular cup to mix it in, and something to stir it with. Now the mixture is an exact even 1-to-1 ratio, so you'll need one part of the resin and 1 part of the hardener. You might want to consider using gloves because it is a little bit of a messy process and it's not really fun when it gets on your hands. Here's 2 shot glasses. I'm going to pour. Again, you want to make sure that it's really nice and even, the amounts that you're pouring in. Okay. What happens is if you don't do a nice even mixture, I found that the pieces don't dry nicely and they get kind of sticky and it ruins the cufflink. Now that I have you the true parts, you can go ahead and mix them into a cup. Give the cup a stir for about 2 minutes. Now that I've finished mixing the resin in the cup, I'm going to carefully pour it into the cufflinks that I've made that are sitting in the jig. Start on this side. As you pour, just do it slowly, and then you can watch as it actually creates like a surface tension that'll give a nice bubble effect to the resin after it dries. You'll see some bubbles as you pour it. The bubbles will start to dissipate as it hardens. Try not to let the resin overflow the cufflink because it just gets so messy. You also run the risk of the cufflink backing sticking pretty tightly to the jig. It's kind of hard to get it out. Nice thing is that if you do get resin on the outside of the cufflink, the finding, it comes off pretty easily with a knife. Now that I've poured all the resin into the cufflinks, you want to find some kind of container or a dish that will cover the whole thing. It should be covered, otherwise you get dust particles in there and it just does not look nice when it's done. So covering it will keep it nice for the remainder of the drying process. It takes about 24 to 36 hours for it to really dry fully. So that's what it looks like, and we'll check it out when it's done. Here's a pair of cufflinks that we just finished. They look very nice. The logo is cleared, the resin cleared nicely, no bubbles. You can see the surface tension, a little bit of a nice bubble effect on the top with the resin. Looks very nice.